Good evening. The former chairman of Swindon Town Football Club has tonight begun a 12-month jail sentence for his part in a huge tax swindle. The fiddles and under-the-counter cash payments to players rocked the soccer world and led to shame and humiliation for Swindon Town. Tonight, in this special programme of reports and analysis, we look in detail at how the fraud was perpetrated and hear reaction from professionals and supporters. We'll also be discussing the issues behind the scandal with Jeff Twentyman, Bristol Rovers club captain and a representative of the Professional Footballers Association, and Vic Morgan, BBC Wiltshire Sound's former sports editor, who's followed the saga closely over the years. But first, the men behind the fraud. Former club chairman, 49-year-old Brian Hillier, sentenced today to a year in prison for conspiracy to defraud the Inland Revenue. And 41-year-old Vince Farrer, convicted of conspiracy and false accounting, given a 6-month suspended jail term. Lou Macari, who was manager at the time, was cleared of any involvement in the conspiracy. It was unofficial contracts like this that trapped Brian Hillier. Once they'd been leaked to a Sunday paper 2 years ago, the Inland Revenue had to investigate. During the 5-week trial, 20 players, all guaranteed immunity from prosecution, told how they got payments not listed in their official contracts. The defence claimed this was to get round Football League rules, but the jury found the intention was also to avoid paying more than £100,000 in tax. Prosecution counsel Michael Hubbard QC claimed that money for the fiddle came from falsifying gate receipts and siphoning off money from programme sales. Mr. Hillier was described as the architect of the conspiracy. Sentencing him, the judge said that if he planned to breach league rules, he knew as an intelligent businessman that he would also have to hide the payments from the Inland Revenue. Mr. Farrer was described as a necessary participant in the conspiracy. In his defence, it was said he was merely doing what he'd been told. But the jury decided that was enough to convict him. Lou Macari was cleared of all charges. The jury accepted his evidence that his only involvement was in negotiating with players and that he was nothing to do with the conspiracy. Reaction has continued to emerge today as Mr. Hillier was taken from the dock to court cells before being driven away in a prison bus to begin his sentence. His solicitor was left to make a statement, first on Mr. Macari's reaction to the prison sentence.
Well, as I think you probably saw in court, he's extremely upset about it. He's down seeing Mr. Hillier in the cells at the moment. He's very upset.
Mr. Hillier's reaction?
Mr. Hillier's reaction, I think he's very shocked at the sentence, but given the relative severity of it, he's taking it very bravely. I suspect he will find it a little difficult to come to terms with in the short term at least, but he's a resourceful man. He'll serve his sentence, or such of it as he needs to, depending on the outcome of the appeal, and pick up his life when he comes out.
The Inland Revenue investigators who uncovered the conspiracy were praised by the judge, who said they should be highly commended. During the trial, the court heard claims that the practice of unofficial contracts was widespread. A spokesman today answered inquiries on the matter with typical reticence.
It's always our duty to investigate. If we feel there's abuse going on in a certain area, well, then we will investigate and we'll follow up our inquiries until we're satisfied there's either no abuse or that we've counteracted it.
So are there investigations ongoing into other clubs at the moment?
I can't comment on that. Other clubs aren't on trial here. Everyone's tax affairs are confidential.
Swindon Town and its supporters club are currently abroad on a pre-season tour. We spoke earlier to their new chairman, Ray Hardman, from their hotel in Middelburg, Holland.
I think people will forget, and they'll forget easily, and they'll look forward, and I think the rest of the footballing world will take note. I think they'll learn from what's happened. We have to be whiter than white, and we have to be seen to be whiter than white, and I'm sure every other football club has to be seen to be whiter than white. We'll certainly tackle it that way, and we'll certainly go forward in the best of spirits and the best of manner to be successful.
Tonight, the former chief executive of the FA, Ted Croker, said he doubted there was any truth in allegations made during the trial that illegal payments were common at other league clubs. He was asked for his reaction to the one-year sentence passed on Brian Hillier.
I think one of sympathy particularly. There may be one or two who will, I mean, there were the panel who sat, a Football League chairman who sat and took the decision to relegate them to the 3rd Division, obviously took this case very seriously, and I think probably many of them will feel he's got his just desserts, but there will be an awful lot who will be sympathetic. I think there'll be far more who will be sympathetic.
Because some of them will have fiddled the books too?
Well, I wouldn't like to infer at all that other clubs have fiddled the books, because without evidence, it's all very well for, I think it was Lou Macari who made the statement in court that a lot of other clubs were doing this. I think that was a bold statement to make, and I think he may be asked to justify that one day.
The Football Association says it closed its file on Swindon Town when it reduced the punishment imposed by the Football League. Today, we asked for their reaction to the trial and whether it will affect their actions. They issued this statement: "We will have to look long and hard at the findings of the court before we decide whether or not to reopen our investigation." The Football League inquiry and the subsequent tax fraud trial have uncovered the seamier side of football finance. Are under-the-counter cash payments to players widespread? What led up to the Swindon revelations? Lou Macari was acquitted of all charges, but Brian Hillier and Vince Farrer had cheated the league and the taxman. Our sports editor, David Passmore, now traces the history and investigates the issues behind the Swindon Town scandal.
Swindon, 1992. The squad in pre-season training, trying to ignore the ghosts of corruption which have once again returned to haunt the side.
1, 2, 3, 4.
In the last 2 years, the club's done everything possible to distance itself from an old regime which brought disgrace on Swindon Town, robbed the club of First Division football and provoked a scandal which shocked the footballing world. The club was punished by the Football League with demotion from the First Division. Now the individuals responsible have been dealt with by the Inland Revenue. The new manager, Glenn Hoddle, is part of the new order. But some of his players were brought to Swindon by Macari and received illegal payments. They were guaranteed immunity from prosecution, but have not escaped the scrutiny of the Inland Revenue or the ordeal of a court case.
Hoddle with a beautiful piece of skill. What a magnificent goal by Glenn Hoddle.
Glenn Hoddle was one of the most gifted players ever seen on a football field. He's done much to inspire the same style of play at the county ground. But despite his efforts, it'll be many years before the name of Swindon Town is known to a wider audience as anything other than the club which cheated its rivals.
Can he get Bowden in here? Mitchell! And Swindon are back in it.
There are more clubs using precisely the sort of tactics that Swindon engage. The difference is that I have not ever come across a football club, or it's never even been suggested to me that a football club has cheated so consistently and as regularly as Swindon did.
The fans took the glory. Now that they realise that the glory was tarnished, then they have to, you know, swallow that and take the punishment like everybody else.
Between 1985 and 1989, Swindon Town were reigned over by a management riddled with dishonesty. Those were the words of the prosecuting barrister, Michael Hubbard QC. Many Swindon supporters have argued that corruption is widespread. They maintain Swindon's been made a scapegoat by the footballing authorities, unable to police the professional game. So have Swindon been unfairly treated, or did they undermine the central concept of fair play?
Lorimer with the corner. Macari, 1-0 to Scotland.
Lou Macari was one of the game's great characters in the 1970s and early 80s. He won 24 Scottish caps. He moved from Celtic to Manchester United, where he scored 97 goals in more than 400 senior appearances.
That was awkward for Ross, and it's gone in.
Duxbury. Oh, I say! Oh, that's got to be the cheekiest goal of the season.
One of his most important and perhaps luckiest won Manchester United the FA Cup in 1977.
On by Macari. Smith slips slightly. Jimmy Greenock. And has it gone in by Macari, is it?
By contrast, his management career didn't start well. In 1984, Swindon were bottom of the 4th Division. His first season was dominated by a row with his assistant, Harry Gregg, and the chairman sacked them both.
We felt, on consideration of all the facts, that it was the only right thing that we could do in the interest of the football club, because I think perhaps what we were questioning was the man's ability to manage.
But a week later, he was reinstated because of demands by the fans. The Hillier-Macari partnership was sealed and success followed. A record-breaking 4th Division championship in 1986. Just a year later, promotion from the 3rd.
Nice little flick on. And that's the opening goal from Steve White.
After 2 seasons in Division 2, and despite reaching the playoffs for a place in Division 1, Macari moved to West Ham. The man who replaced him was another world-famous footballing name, Ossie Ardiles, who transformed the team's style of play but continued the club's success. Just 10 months later, they were playing for a place in Division 1 in the first ever promotion playoff final at Wembley. 35,000 Swindon fans packed the stadium, just Sunderland between them and the 1st Division. The carnival atmosphere was complemented by stylish football, even if it was a lucky goal which gave Swindon victory. For the first time in the club's history, Swindon were in the 1st Division. But 10 days later, Swindon's glory was shattered. A scandal which had been brewing for the past 7 months exploded. A scandal which had been denied in the most vigorous and at times aggressive manner by the chairman.
I'm going to tell all of you, you're just absolutely wasting your time staying here.
But Swindon then admitted 36 breaches of Football League regulations. Tax-free payments had been made to players outside their Football League contracts. At a Football League hearing at Villa Park in Birmingham, Swindon, represented by their new chairman, Gary Herbert, were demoted from the 1st Division. In the most severe punishment ever handed out by the Football League, they were condemned to Division 3.
I would ask our supporters to remain calm and leave the Board of Directors a short time to consider the question of an appeal. Thank you.
I really don't want to say very much, except that I'm devastated. I never really dreamt I'd see this in football. Excuse me.
The directors left the hearing in a state of shock. The fans were more vocal.
I want Swindon Town back where they've worked to be, and that's in the 1st Division. You know, that's all I can say. I'm gutted.
That night, supporters packed the county ground demanding justice. The town went into mourning. Everyone went into action.
On behalf of all the players of Swindon Town Football Club, we are quite naturally devastated at the result of yesterday's Football League inquiry.
Ozzy Ardiles flew home from Argentina to say he was staying with the club.
On behalf of the Swindon Town supporters. Okay, take care. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Going up!
There was no doubt about who the fans thought was guilty. They protested everywhere. The Football League was a particular target. The club couldn't afford expensive legal action, and their appeal to the Football Association was only partially successful.
In that Swindon Town FC be demoted one division, i.e. to the second division, for the 1990-91 season.
A reprieve, but still Swindon were deprived of First Division football. Sunderland were promoted instead. No one knew it at the time, but Swindon's downfall had begun with this game at St James's Park in Newcastle 2 years before. Swindon were knocked out of the 1988 FA Cup by 5-0. But it wasn't the result which mattered. Rather, a remarkable decision by the club's chairman to bet on his own side to lose. Brian Hillier received a cheque for £4,000 as a result of that wager. The man who exposed the scandal, which went against the whole principle of the game, was reporter Bill Bradshaw of the Sunday People.
I was approached by a fan who contacted me completely out of the blue, wasn't solicited by me, to tell me some strange goings-on in the betting shop at Swindon Town. And that led to the November, some 8, 9, 10 months after we were originally approached, in the story about the astonishing bet by Brian Hillier and Lou Macari against their own team.
Mr Hillier was eventually banned from the game for 3 years as a result, and Lou Macari fined for his part in placing the bet. Bill Bradshaw followed up this expose with a far more damaging revelation that the club was making illegal payments to players and cheating the transfer system. The Inland Revenue and the footballing authorities moved into the county ground and took the books apart.
Will you be able to speak to us afterwards? No, I don't anticipate. What are you going to be
I've always felt that the fans had a raw deal, but not from this newspaper, from the way the football club was run. I was at Wembley Stadium on that bank holiday Monday when they clinched promotion to the what was then the First Division, what would now be the Premier League. And they deserved it in terms of the way they played their football. But what has to be remembered is that team that the fans supported was put together through cheating the system.
I think what Bill does is wrong. I think week after week in his newspaper, he actually makes attempts to have a go at people. I mean, if that's a normal way of life for anyone to go about...
Revealing corruption is wrong.
Lou Macari believed there was a conspiracy between all those who criticised the club. He faced Bill Bradshaw on a local radio phone-in, accusing him of being fed information by the club's former secretary, Dave King, and Carol Embry, the woman who tried to take over the club. Claims both of them denied.
People obviously have access to Grind, and it's my job as a journalist to bear that in mind when certain information perhaps is made available to this newspaper or to me. But at no point did I feel that I was being used or manipulated, no, because I certainly would have felt that if it turned out that I was being told things which were patently untrue or malicious. That wasn't the case.
For 5 years, the club systematically cheated both the Inland Revenue and the Football League. In addition to fiddling the transfer system, they made cash payments to players in the form of bonuses and signing-on fees. These weren't included in the player's Football League contract or declared to the taxman. Swindon captain Colin Calderwood, as with all footballers giving evidence in the trial, was guaranteed immunity from prosecution. He moved to Swindon from Mansfield in the 1984-85 season. In addition to his Football League contract, he signed, as did many other players, a side agreement, which guaranteed him a signing-on fee. He got £2,000 immediately, with £1,000 paid in each of the following seasons, a total of £4,000 paid in cash, tax-free. There were man-of-the-match cash bonuses, some of which players pooled in a building society and shared out at the end of the season. As captain, Colin Calderwood also distributed cash bonuses totalling £7,000 to players after the side won the 4th Division title in 1986. Other current and former Swindon players told their story to the court. John Gittings said he received a £7,500 signing-on fee when he joined from Southampton. Goalkeeper Fraser Digby on the left here said in addition to his signing-on fee, he was paid a cash bonus of £50 every game he didn't concede a goal. There were loyalty bonuses. Dave Bamber, now with Blackpool, told how he signed a side agreement which guaranteed him £750 for every year he stayed with the club. Chris Kamara, now with Luton, said his basic salary of £200 a week was topped up with a tax-free cash bonus of £30, paid for by the supporters club. The prosecution say more than £100,000 was paid out, mostly in cash, but all without deductions for tax. The prosecution also said the club altered the official attendance figure, pocketing the extra revenue, a claim denied by the defendants. There was an invoice for £8,500 worth of straw to protect the pitch. Only a fraction of that was delivered. The remaining cash was paid to players. Players were also paid cash raised by the supporters club.
We actually had a fund called the Lou Macari Players Fund, which people paid money into to help us get players and to keep players. It was all so open. I mean, we opened a fund especially for that purpose. It was just delivered to the club. I was down the club most weeks anyway, and so we just used to take the money to the club and leave it marked for the players' attention.
During the investigation by the Football League, it was also revealed that the club manipulated the transfer system. When clubs fail to agree on a transfer fee, the matter is determined by tribunal. One of the factors the tribunal considers is the wages the player will receive at his new club. Swindon lied about the total wages on offer, so the transfer fees they paid were artificially low. In all, they saved over £40,000. 6 cases were investigated, and because the extra payments made to players weren't considered, Swindon got players on the cheap. The prosecution said Swindon cheated their way to the top. They'd never been able to attract the squad they did without offering illegal cash payments. Swindon deceived the Football League and avoided paying tax. But did they buy success? So are extra payments to players common practice?
Certainly, I don't think that anything they did was particularly new. I think that, that clubs have on occasions used the odd dodge, the odd trick like that, and I don't think that anything Swindon did particularly was new to anybody who knows some of the strokes that are pulled in football. I think what surprised me and surprised the football authorities and ultimately the revenue was how consistently Swindon were doing it.
I don't think there's a pro player anywhere in the country that when he's in the thick of action in 90 minutes thinks about his win bonus. If you aim for the performances and the pride of wanting to win and the pride of doing well for the club and trying to achieve promotion, then bonuses will follow. You don't have that as your ideals. Some of the wages that are quoted at the top level earners in football, everyone sort of thinks, well, every player's on that or just a little bit under. It's not that way. There's a lot of players in the 3rd and 4th and in the 2nd that are not on very much. They could easily give up their careers and go to something else and earn more money.
The man who must carry the can for all the things that went wrong for the books is the chairman, Brian Hillier. A chairman who sanctions this scale of misdemeanor has got to be banned for life. Morally, you can make the argument that the fans weren't to blame. The problem is there is no way yet devised of punishing the players and not punishing the fans. And because, you know, you've got to look at it another way and say that for all the heartache caused to Swindon's fans was a great deal of joy. There was an equal amount of joy caused to the fans of Sunderland. So really, it may be very, very difficult for a Swindon fan to take it on board, but taking the global view, it was the fairest outcome.
We've done a lot of good work last year in a short space of time to really put that behind us. And I think really it's a case of when this is when the file is actually shut and put away in the drawer, I don't think there'll be any problems. Certainly there'll be a few individual players that might need a little bit of help and guidance, but that's up to the club, you know, myself included, to deal with that. But no, it's about looking into the future rather than looking back over our shoulders.
It shouldn't be a Sunday newspaper's job to ask us to act as football's policemen. It's time that the football authorities did it for themselves. But yeah, I'm sure that it is still happening, despite what should be the frightening consequences, as has been seen by the Revenue's action. It will still be happening because there will always be people greedy in professional sport, and particularly in professional football.
Well, I'm joined now by Vic Morgan, BBC Wiltshire Sound's former sports editor, who watched events closely as they were unfolding. Vic, what effect has this had on the footballing world?
I'm sure it's had a great effect on the footballing world. Remember, this was a club who'd achieved promotion at Wembley, got to the First Division for the first time in its history, and then 10 days later had its dreams shattered with the most punitive effect possible. It had been demoted 2 divisions to Division 3, only to be reinstated to Division 2 later on. I'm sure that alone had a massive effect on the football world, and I'm sure the whole investigation has been seen as a shot up across the bows of football.
And is that investigation continuing now? The Revenue won't actually come clean about it at the moment, but what do you think?
There are indications that other clubs are being investigated, certainly by the Inland Revenue, because of the Swindon Town affair.
Do we know which?
The Inland Revenue are being very cagey about it, but there are indications that other clubs are being investigated. Perhaps not the giants of football, but certainly clubs a little bit lower down the league.
So many more shock revelations, you think?
Possibly there are more revelations to come.
Briefly, how long have the Revenue known or suspected that this may be going on?
Some years ago, there was an amnesty held by the Inland Revenue, whereby clubs who were thought to have been making ex gratia payments were asked to come forward and declare that to the Inland Revenue, and money was perhaps paid to the Revenue from that without the clubs being punished for it. So I'm sure the Revenue have been aware of this for a long, long time.
Vic Morgan, thank you very much. Perhaps the saddest victims of this whole affair have been the fans, who've consistently argued they've been unfairly punished for the chairman's crimes. Sean Lay has been to Swindon to gauge their latest reaction.
If club supporters resent anything about the events that soured Swindon Town's reputation, it's not that illegal payments were made to players, but that having fought their way to the First Division in 1990, the club should have been punished with demotion.
I feel I've been ripped off. Going to Wembley, they knew they were going to demote us anyway. We went to Wembley and we won and we got demoted. You know, and I feel it's totally out of order.
Resentment, really, what they got us into, what the Football League did to us, i.e. relegation.
In Sunderland, big club, big team, and to beat them was, you know, hell of a day. And yeah, I find the fans were the main ones to suffer.
There's away fans that come to the county ground. They sing and about the things that happened at the county ground, but just take no notice.
For a town in economic decline at the end of the 80s, football's success was a source of genuine pride.
I remember, you know, families, neighbours from where I live, kids of 5 and 6 and that, you know, going to see the game at Wembley with their dads, coming back. You know, they were there, they were in the First Division, unbelievable. But it just went, and it's just not talked about anymore.
Here they used to talk about the football all the time, but not so much now. It's just, how did the town get on? Oh, they lost. Well, that's it.
Yet many do still support the team, and although there were no parties to celebrate the jury's verdict, in the pub that backs onto the county ground, fans were preparing to join a group of 400 going out to cheer the team on this week's tour of Holland. Surrounded by reminders of a time when local footballers earned almost nothing for their efforts, they're convinced that Swindon wasn't alone in making illegal payments to players.
I don't think it's just the only team in the country where that sort of thing happens, and I think they're just being made a scapegoat.
Why did they make you scapegoats?
Well, somebody had to go down. They caught Chelsea at it, but Chelsea's a big club, Swindon or not. So it's easy to demote us and kick us around rather than somebody like Chelsea.
Because of the fees the football players were getting, that's why they was getting the backhanders, because we're not a big city, which is right, isn't it? Yeah.
The not guilty verdict against former manager Lou Macari was widely welcomed.
I was treated as a bit of a hero in Swindon, and certainly is still a hero of me.
Everyone was singing his name with praise, and then as soon as this happened, he seemed to get forgotten. People didn't want to know him anymore.
There's optimism about what the club can now achieve.
I don't think it'll take long to get to build their reputation back up again, really. You know, if they get the support that they need, then yeah, I think they'll do pretty well.
Do you think the support is here?
I think so, definitely, in Swindon.
Do you still go to the games?
Not very often, no. No, not anymore. I suppose if they got back into the First Division, everyone would start going again. But I won't be going for a while.
The shine taken off their Wembley victory by scandal could now reappear, and the club's fans hope that, more than polishing their memories, the new team can revive both its own fortunes and their pride in Swindon football.
Well, Jeff Twentyman, you're an experienced player and a representative of the PFA. You can understand the fans being pretty sick about what's been happening.
Oh, immense sympathy. I mean, just looking at those pictures, I mean, it rekindles the great sympathy I had at the time, you know. But I'm sure Swindon are going to have a great future with Glenn Hoddle as manager. And I think they'll probably draw on the strength of this, and maybe next season they could be celebrating something as opposed to being a bit down at the moment.
Were you surprised about these revelations?
Oh, indeed, yes. I mean, it's been simmering for a couple of years, and I think when they were revealed, I think probably every footballer in the country was stunned. I think it's probably an accurate word.
And yet we've been hearing suggestions that this practice was widespread in other clubs. Do you think it is?
I think widespread's probably a bit of an exaggeration. As I sit here, I couldn't possibly say that Swindon were the only club. I'm sure there's been illegal payments made, and I'm quite sure in the 2 years that this case has simmered that they've stopped. But great sympathy for Swindon, and they've been made, you know, a prime example that this mustn't go on.
We just heard there that accusations that they've been made a scapegoat. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I mean, scapegoat may be strong, but they've been made a firm example of, I think would probably be a more accurate way of putting it.
Is the problem that the league can't police itself, and that's the problem?
Well, it's very difficult, Chris. I mean, players sign contracts, they're registered with the Football League. I mean, that in itself is fairly simple. But if someone wishes to make irregular payments outside of the contract, in a room underneath a grandstand, I mean, there's very little the Football League can do about it.
So you're saying, in effect, that there'll be some chairman watching Hillier drive off to prison saying, there, but for the grace of God, go the rest of us?
It's possible. I mean, like I say, I'm sure there's been payments made irregularly, but the frightening thing that could be, I don't know how far the revenue can go back. It could be 6 or 7 years. So I mean, you know, anyone who has misdemeanored, I mean, they may not be sleeping too well at the moment.
Vic Morgan, how do you feel about the effect that this is going to have, the repercussions that are going to spread across the industry now?
I'm sure football now will have to be seen to be whiter than white. We certainly heard Ray Hardman say earlier on that Swindon Town will want to be seen to be whiter and white. They want to put this behind them now, and Glenn Hoddle says they're going to look to the future, and I'm sure that's right. Certainly the club is working to put this whole episode behind them. And I'm sure football will want to be seen to be whiter than white because the image of the game undoubtedly has suffered.
Jeff, I mean, people will get the impression that the system for paying players is a complete mess in view of what's happened at Swindon.
To be quite honest, I mean, some of the things I've seen the way Swindon have tried to pay their players, I mean, has confused me. I mean, at PFA level, we get involved in many inquiries, many problems at clubs, and I can quite honestly say I've never seen anything like Swindon have done.
In a word, then, what about the future? Will the club be able to get back online and forget this, put it in the past?
I would think they will. I mean, at Bristol Rovers, we've had more than our fair share of adversity. And from that kind of situation, you get an inner strength and you become united. And as I say, it wouldn't surprise me if Swindon don't pull closer together and put this firmly behind them and go on to better things.
Jeff Twentyman, Big Morgan, thank you very much indeed. So tonight, with Brian Hillier in jail and his accountant Vince Farrer having received a suspended sentence, Swindon Town is hoping to put the scandal that shocked the soccer world behind it and get on with trying to reach the Super League where it feels it belongs. From this special edition of Current Account, a very good night to you.